directly into our next presentation, the next phase of Black-owned record labels. And I'd like to introduce our speaker, Brenda Nelson-Strauss, who was the head of collections, the Indiana University Archives of African American Music and Culture for 20 years until her retirement in 2022. During that time, she was also the founding editor of the music review site Black Grooves. Prior positions include serving as director of the Rosenthal Archives of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and a sound recording cataloger at the UI Archives of Traditional Music. A past president of ARSC, we're catching a theme here. She received the Distinguished Service Award in 2015 for her work as coordinator and co-author of the Library of Congress's National Recorded Sound Preservation Plan. And now for Black-owned record labels from 1940 to 1970.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be standing up here as a presenter instead of a conference manager. So thank you very much, Tim, for that overview of early Black labels. So I view my presentation as kind of the birth of the Black recording industry starting in the World War II years, because there wasn't really anything in between Tim's presentation and mine. So how did this come about? Well, purely by chance, 4 years ago, I was invited to travel to Los Angeles to view a record collection. And the only thing the widow of the collector knew is that her husband collected Black music, and it was on 78s. And I thought, you know, it's probably a bunch of Victors or whatever. But I was really quite surprised when I went through the collection. And not being a collector myself, I wasn't familiar with many of the labels. But once I started researching them, I realized that he was also collecting Black-owned record labels. And amazingly, I thought it was very, very difficult to find information on so many of these labels, so much so that it's been 4 years since I did that trip, and I'm only now, you know, kind of getting a handle on the scope of everything. Anyway, that collection was ultimately donated to UCSB, and David Soibert's going to be talking about it later this afternoon. But it was this initial project that really got me hooked on the subject, and I decided that I'd do it as a retirement project. So how did my research evolve? Initially, when I did an internet search on Black-owned record labels, and it led me to the Soulful Detroit website, which just has amazing people participating. But Rob Klein had started a thread on this topic, and at the end of this thread, he concluded, "What we've listed so far has barely scratched the surface. There are literally thousands. I know hundreds just in Chicago, LA, New York, Detroit, let alone Philly, Washington, DC, Baltimore, Atlanta, New Orleans, and other southern cities. I could easily die before I finish this list." Well, obviously, he had no cutoff date, so, and my cutoff date is 1970, so that makes some bit of difference. And I later corresponded with Rob and learned that he's 80, and so I figured I had at least a decade on him, and maybe I'd have time to make some progress on this. I just wish I had his deep knowledge and could get him to list more of these record labels that he has in his head. But I started with authoritative websites like the amazing Red Saunders Research Foundation. I'm sure some of you have come upon that before. And of course, Marv Goldberg. Then, of course, extensively Discogs. Discogs oftentimes lists the owners and a photo of the owners if they're known. But I really turned a lot to 45cat. Because there are amazing discussions in the comment sections, and my buddies who seem to know everything, Mickey Rat and Dead Wax, I have no idea who they are, nor have I been able to find out, but they have amazing knowledge. And of course, Alan Sutton's discographies, lots of blogs and websites, extensive research on Ancestry.com. Fortunately, you know, this period, a lot of the people involved, the men, had registered for the draft for World War II or listed in census. So that was a big help if their names were distinctive enough. But so all of this information, as you can imagine, is just very widely dispersed in a lot of different places and has taken 4 years of digging just to put any kind of list together. And then there are some challenges too, like I'm sure that there are a lot of articles in collectors' magazines that would be useful, but none of those are indexed. And discographies are often hard to come by, not included in my library at home, at Indiana University, I should say. So yeah, definitely a lot of challenges I still have to face. But that aside, my database has been constructed in Google Sheets because I figured it was the most flexible ultimately, and it includes those who established labels by 1970. But I decided to also include any subsequent post-1970 labels they started during the course of their careers. So in other words, once you're in, you're in. But in terms of my statistics, I cut off at 1970. My decision to use 1970 as a cutoff date was due to the growing share of the black music market taken over by major labels during that time who were beginning to start black music divisions. And this post-1970 period had been studied very extensively by my mentor, Dr. Portia K. Maltzby at Indiana University, who has been encouraging me to pursue this project. So these post-World War II entrepreneurs included a wide range of blues, gospel, rhythm and blues, and to a lesser extent, jazz musicians, including emerging artists trying to catch a lucky break by cutting a disc to pitch to larger labels or to get radio airplay. And a lot of these smaller independent labels, as you can imagine, just operated out of a house. And so while you wouldn't consider them to be record companies, they were still labels. Other labels were started by artist managers, songwriters and producers, athletes, preachers, actors, comedians. The most successful of the owners had access to promotion and distribution networks, such as disc jockeys, jukebox distributors, and record store owners. Or they had learned the ropes at other labels, recording studios, or in working in record manufacturing plants. So I began my research on the West Coast and worked my way east. I think to this list, I think I have found labels in Louisville, Kentucky, and also in Minnesota. So I didn't have time to add those to this map. And for my research, because of the information that Rob Klein and his crew initially provided, I concentrated mostly on California, Chicago, Detroit, and the New York, New Jersey area. But as you can see, I was also fairly comprehensive. So far, I've logged about 1,350 labels to date. Now, I've done some informal polling in the last couple of days. I've asked some very knowledgeable people, how many black-owned labels do you think there were prior to 1960? Because, you know, a lot of R&B labels were still pressed on 78s up until 1960. And I was surprised that the answers were like between 5 and 20. Well, so far I have 140 different black-owned labels that issued 78s before 1960, and I'm sure that I'll find many more. Does that surprise people? Okay, good, because I was really insecure about this research. And if Rob Klein is correct, there are still hundreds of labels left to discover, no doubt many that release just a handful of singles at best. So my research is very preliminary at this point and certainly far from complete. And so my initial goal was just to start compiling some kind of core database so that when I reached out to other people for assistance, I could prove that I had already done a lot of the work myself. So here's a sample database entry for Mickey Stevenson, who some might recognize as a Motown producer. He started his first label, Step, in 1959 in Detroit, and then subsequent labels after he moved to California. So as you can see, there are columns for the approximate years of the label. Everything is approximate. Formats, though I mostly only listed 78s, 45s, and LPs. The estimated number of releases, this was very difficult, so these are truly estimates, and sometimes I had to go back and forth between 45 Cat and Discogs and try to like weed out all of the reissues and variant issues to come up with some kind of number. So again, you know, like really approximate. And of course I've got, you know, label addresses when available, links to bios of the owners, links to the Discogs and 45 Cat entries, because if you've ever tried to search like obscure or labels on Discogs, it's very difficult, but much easier on 45 Cat. Also, if there's a label compilation, I have a column for that, and brief source notes. Most of my notes are in a separate Word document that's at least 100 pages. I initially started, excuse me, can you hand me my water? Sorry. I initially started adding photos of the owners and the labels, but that proved to be just way too time-consuming. So I might go back and add that later, but I stopped doing that early on. Okay, so why? Why did I decide to single out Black label owners, especially at this point in time, one might say? To the best of my knowledge, at least, there's no comprehensive resource documenting the contributions of African American label owners during this period. Though much has been written about the rise of R&B and independent labels, most studies focus on the larger, primarily white-owned labels, or the big three black-owned record labels, including, of course, Berry Gordy's Motown in Detroit, Vivian Carter and James Bracken's VJ in Chicago, and Don Roby's Duke Peacock Empire in Houston. In fact, I've seen many articles by scholars that mention the paucity of Black-owned labels in general, which we will find is not really the case. Certainly true if you're looking at big producers, but not overall. So our story today begins in California, and here are some basic statistics. I've added 175 label owners so far and 266 labels. Obviously, some owners had more than one, some had many. Though most of these small independent labels released less than 10 records, at least 11% released 50 or more, which was, you know, reasonably successful at the time. But no individual company in California was truly dominant. And here's another interesting statistic. At least 36 Black-owned labels were started in California in the 1940s. That's more than twice as many as were started in Chicago in this period, at least so far in my research, and only a handful in Michigan and New York and New Jersey. Another surprise, they came from Oklahoma. You know, when I was trying to decide whether I'd present this year, I thought, you know, there aren't any Black-owned labels in Oklahoma, maybe I'll wait. But then I started realizing there are a lot of label owners that came from Oklahoma. Why? Because the World War II era, of course, saw more than 500,000 African Americans migrate to California, and the majority at this time came from Louisiana, Texas, and Oklahoma, all big music areas. Lured by the opportunities in the defense industry, they made LA the rhythm and blues mecca of the entire country. So here we see band leader Ernie Fields in an aircraft assembly plant in Oklahoma. He was raised just southeast of Tulsa, as were most of the people in my presentation. He was in the black town of Taft, and then in the 1950s, he joined other Oklahoma natives in Los Angeles. So then we come to some of the early California pioneers. Leroy Hurt and Roy Milton came from, hear it. Because a general overview of labels is certainly not possible, nor can I do even representation between cities, I decided for this presentation to focus primarily on those with some kind of Oklahoma connection. So Leroy Hurt was born in Muskogee. His grandfather was a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and I've also found that most of the label owners that I'm focusing on today did have some Native American heritage, except for a couple of exceptions. So Leroy, in 1939, he took over the Bronze Recording Company from John Levy, who was himself an African-American artist manager. And there were 4 bronze releases in 1940 before the war interrupted production. But it was Hurt's 1944 recordings of Cecil Gant's I Wonder, followed by Joe Ligon's The Honey Dripper, that really turned into hits, which were then poached by a larger label. Hurt eventually left the business to attend Juilliard and became a classical composer and conductor, hence his suit and tie there in the photograph. Pretty amazing career. And when he was blacklisted, after there was this copyright dispute with Gilt Edge, he was blacklisted from the pressing plant and was forced to install his own pressing plant as well. So another big name from Oklahoma is Roy Milton. His first professional gig was actually with the Ernie Fields Band in Tulsa. In 1935, he moved to LA. Coincidentally, I don't know if people know this, coincidentally, just as the Bahari brothers moved to Tulsa with their family. From 1946 to 1948, Roy started the Miltone, Roy Milton, Cleartone, Photo, and Ace labels, some in partnership with Forrest War Perkins. And he's known for his really hip label designs, which were done by New York cartoonist William Alexander. And in fact, it's really hard to distinguish which label is which, because they all look rather similar with these cartoon labels. Okay, so the Renee family. Before the Bahari brothers established Modern Records, or Art Roop started Specialty, or Eddie and Leo Mesner started Aladdin, brothers Otis and Leon Renee claimed their stake in the rhythm and blues market in California. They were successful songwriters who originated from New Orleans, and they started the Amore label in 1939. Very, very rare. I could barely find one copy. This was possibly released before Leroy Hurt's first bronze recording. Their exclusive and Excelsior labels were very successful in the 1940s. Leon's son, known as Gucci, managed the Class label in the 1950s. And more relevant to our story, Ernie Fields led the house band for the Rendezvous label. And Oklahoma native Jimmy Rushing also recorded his early sides for the Excelsior label. I'm really sorry that Lamont Jack Purley was not able to join us to present on John Dolphin, who deserves a whole session to himself. But he is one of the most famous of the black record label owners in California during this time. So there's a lot of information and a biography on him written by his grandson. So I'll just say that he operated the famous Dolphins of Hollywood record store on Central Avenue in Los Angeles. And he started a label by the same name, Dolphins of Hollywood, and then recorded in Hollywood. He also, before there was a Cash Money Records in New Orleans, he had a Cash and a Money label, and the not so lucky label, which only had a few releases. But interestingly, Dolphin was raised in Boley, Oklahoma, which was a very wealthy black pioneer town like Greenwood here in Tulsa, which offered a haven from the Jim Crow South. It also offered excellent educational opportunities for Dolphin. After he left Oklahoma, he worked for a brief period of time at Ford in Detroit and then actually studied copyright law in Chicago, but then got work as a Pullman porter, and he had a route that went from Chicago to LA. Maybe he even carried a few 78s with him to distribute, as was not uncommon at the time, but he landed out west and had the biggest record store in LA. Tragically, he was shot and killed in his store in 1958, but his widow, Ruth, continued to manage it and seems to have started several new labels with a partner named Alton Scott, who I don't have any information about. And more famously, Rudy Ray Moore, who you otherwise known as Dolomite, worked in Dolphins of Hollywood store before he started his own record label. Black Hollywood is also well represented in these early labels. Singer-composer Clarence Muse on the left went on to become a very famous actor. He started the Kangaroo label in 1949, but only released one disc featuring himself with Dusty Brooks on the right, Dusty Brooks in his four tones. Dusty was from Oklahoma, and he often portrayed the sidekick to Herb Jeffries, the singing cowboy in westerns such as Harlem Rides the Range and The Bronze Buckaroo. Jeffries himself made his recording debut in 1943 on Otis Renee's Excelsior label. Forrest War Perkins, next to Clarence Muse over there, had a brief stint in films as an extra before he partnered with Roy Milton in the record business. In the Bay Area, we had a number of pioneers, but I'll just mention Bob Geddens, who started the most successful label up there, Big Town. It was a blues and gospel label in Oakland, established in 1945, and he went on to establish 14 more labels. I've listed just a few here. In 1946, he was the first to record blues guitarist Lowell Fulson, who at that time was a 25-year-old native of Tulsa, Oklahoma. That Geddens had met him the previous year. Fulson's first record for Geddens was called Western Union Blues, recorded in 1946. Fulson had apparently left his wife behind in Oklahoma while he established himself on the West Coast, and so I like to think that that contributed to the lonesome blues theme of this recording.
Western Union man, please pass by my house today. Western Union man, please pass by my house today. Cause I may get a call from my baby, gonna hear from her right away.
Okay, moving on, two women enter our story, Effie Smith and Velma Middleton, who were both from Oklahoma. Effie and her husband, singer-songwriter John Lawrence Kreiner, started the Shade label in 1943, followed later by Spot, Tridisc, and Duodisc. Her husband, John Lawrence Kreiner, bears the same name as a very famous early African-American actor. I do not think they were the same person. I think that this John Kreiner may have been his son, but there's still a lot of confusion out there about that. Effie's best known for her comedic song, Dial That Telephone, which I really wanted to play. You'll have to look it up on YouTube. It's a great comic record. And she reissued that song several times on her various labels. Some may know Velma Middleton as a jazz singer who toured with Louis Armstrong. She actually died tragically on a tour with Armstrong in Africa. But she started the Middletone label in 1951 with Emmanuel Middleton, who is listed variously in sources as stepbrother or son. I'm kind of thinking he might have been her son. but that's uncertain. Anyway, she launched her middle tone label with her original song called Big Mama's Back in Town, which you can also find on YouTube. Though born in Oklahoma, Jimmy Ligon's family moved to California when he was quite young in the 1930s. After he released a string of singles for Specialty, he started his Duplex label in 1958, which he ran until 1975, along with his Duplex Black National Records distribution company. And he later, in life, operated Snoopy's record store in Durham, North Carolina. John R. Fulbright is an interesting character. This is the only known photo of him, allegedly of him. He looks kind of like Chris Strachwitz in this photo. Anyway, he was born in 1902 down by the Texas border in Ardmore, Oklahoma. After World War II, he moved to California, and around 1949, he established his Elko record labels. Quite a few sources mention that he was the most colorful and the most belligerent of the LA indie operators. He was interviewed in 1967 by Gary Paulson for Blues Unlimited magazine, where he described his DIY productions as follows. I fixed me a cooling system out of a Frigidaire. I used to be able to run off 60 copies an hour, and I could make a living out of it. That's why some of my old records break so easily. I used to make my own plastic, and sometimes it wasn't nothing but charcoal. Some of his earliest releases featured Oklahoma musicians. He also told Paulson, I brought Slim Green here from Christian, Oklahoma. Him and a cross-eyed woman who played harp came out here together. Fifth Street Alley was the first one he recorded on my J.M. Fulbright label. That song was actually issued in 1948 under the title Alla Blues. The artist was Norman Guitar Slim Green, but the harp player was only ever identified as Turner, and we, I guess, assume it was a woman. So let's hear a brief clip of that.
I love you for yourself. You get drunk and full of your wine, you don't seem to really care. This street LA, baby, must be your home. There ain't nothing down there, baby, but wine, jug, and stone.
Okay, moving across the country to Chicago. Of course, there were many black labels in Chicago besides VJ that achieved moderate success, including those started by VJ personnel, including Calvin Carter, Ewart Abner, and Bill Bunky Shepherd. And of course, various gospel labels as well, started by famous singers such as Roberta Martin and Evelyn Gay. The 1950s brought Leonard Allen and Lou Simpkins United and States, two separate labels. In 1951, there was, the famous DJ Al Benson's Parrot label, George and Ernest Leaner's Wonderful Label Group, Mel London's Chief in 1957, Sun Ra's El Saturn in 1956, and of course, more labels by J. Mayo Williams. By the 1960s, Curtis Mayfield's Curtom was taking off, along with the labels started by Carl Davis, C.J. Jones, Offie Reese, Lenny LaCour, Rick Williams, and Bill Lasley. And I'd like to really thank my Chicago crew, Bob Pruder, Bob Marovich, James Porter, and Aaron Cohen, who have really assisted with that. So Joe Brown was born also 40 minutes southeast of Tulsa in the town of Wagner, Oklahoma. In 1947, he collaborated with James Burke Oden, otherwise known as St. Louis Jimmy, on the Opera label, releasing a handful of sides by local jazz and blues artists, including Oden himself. 2 years later, they launched the more successful JOB Records label. And interestingly, in JB 101, released in 1949, Oden performed the tribute Jack L. Cooper. For those of you who study black radio, a very famous person. He was the first African-American radio broadcaster who began airing the all-Negro hour in Chicago in 1929. Joe Brown went on to form the Fury Ruler and briefly ran the Oriole label from 1958 to 59. Now, this is a very interesting story. Though not born in Oklahoma, Connie Toole had a direct connection to Oklahoma's Black Wall Street. His grandfather, J.B. Stratford, who's featured prominently in the museum if you have a chance to go, he had received a law degree from Indiana University early on and rose to prominence in the black community of Greenwood. His hotel, which had housed many black musicians back in the day, burned to the ground in 1921 during the Tulsa Race Massacre. And when he was accused of inciting a riot immediately after that, he fled to Chicago, where his family would eventually rise from those ashes. In 1950, his grandson, Connie Toole, started the Theron label, which was named after one of his sons. Though the label didn't make much of a splash, his other son, Cornelius E. Toole, became a fourth-generation lawyer in the Stratford family and a prominent circuit court judge and civil rights attorney in Chicago. Okay, moving quickly on to Michigan. Of course, by 1959, Berry Gordy had started building his empire, and in the process swallowing up quite a few smaller black-owned labels, as well as artists, songwriters, and producers. So it's no surprise that the top 15 labels here are all Motown and its subsidiaries, plus the Motown-affiliated Holland Dozier Holland Group at the time. But before and after Motown, of course, there were other labels that were successful on a smaller scale, including those owned by Carmen Murphy and Idessa Malone, who Bob Maravich will be discussing in the next session, Joe Von Battle, Robert West, Michael Alonzo Hanks, Eddie Wingate and Joanne Bratton's well-known Golden World and Rick Tick labels, Ollie McLaughlin, Reverend James Hendricks, and the godmother of Detroit soul, Johnny Mae Matthews, whose national label predated Motown and released a lot of local soul singers. And then there's a very rare label. One of the earliest labels in Detroit was started by a woman named Delmar Ray, and I was able to find this very fuzzy picture of her. The Paradise label was started in around 1948. So Delmar was born in 1915 in Oklahoma to a black Cherokee family. After earning a business degree, she married jukebox operator Reuben Ray and became the bookkeeper for his company. A 1947 Billboard ad announced, "Mrs. Ray has a backlog of some 150 masters by Negro talent hitherto unwaxed, accumulated over the past 5 years, and will use these as Beat the Petrillo Band fodder under 2 new labels, Del Rey and Paradise." So only about a dozen labels seem to have ever been released, and I haven't found any evidence of a Del Rey pressing, just the Paradise. Her family wrote a brief biography of Reuben Ray and his business empire in Detroit. They briefly mentioned her as a bookkeeper. They do not mention anything about her, about their mother running a record label. So that's still a bit of a mystery. And again, moving on quickly, New York, New Jersey, which I reached last, and I still have a lot of work to do here. But pretty similar to the 3 other urban areas discussed, there are quite a few moderately successful labels, but nothing that was equivalent to a Motown prior to 1970. John Broven is going to cover some of the major New York figures in the next session, but some of the other successful labels during this time were started by, there was Ray Charles' Tangerine label, Big Nate McCullough's Calla label, and the Isley Brothers enter the scene in 1964 in New Jersey with their T-Neck label. Not related to Oklahoma, but I wanted to throw some jazz in the mix. More jazz labels started to emerge in New York City during this time, including Wax, started by jazz bassist Al Hall in '46, Duke and Mercer Ellington's Mercer label, founded in 1950 with Leonard Feather, and Debut Records started in 1952 by Charles Mingus, his then wife Celia, and Max Roach. Other jazz labels established during this period were established by Babs Gonzalez, Nat King Cole, and Tom Blanchard Wilson's free jazz label Transition was started in 1955. And there's a somewhat tie-in to Tulsa in that if you saw the Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, there's a scene in the recording studio with a tall, thin black man as an engineer. That is actually Eric Berryman portraying Tom Wilson. And I did want to throw in some more women in my last second here. Zell Sanders, who was known as the girls group visionary, again, before Motown. She had her J&S label in 1956, and Ace Records has compiled a lot of her recordings. Then Victoria Spivey and her partner Len Kunstadt established Queen V, which immediately turned into Spivey and was basically an album-based label. And then, of course, there's Sylvia Robinson, who started in the business with her partner, Mickey Baker, the duo Mickey and Sylvia, with their Willow label. But then after that, of course, she married Joe Robinson and started a series of labels, Stang in '68, All Platinum in '70, and then, of course, their most famous label, Sugar Hill Records in 1979. But going back to the beginning, Gladys Hampton does not get enough credit, I don't think, for being one of the first people to establish a record label in New York during this time. In terms of black entrepreneurs. Hamptone was founded in 1946 and released primarily rhythm and blue and some jazz music. And then from 1960 to '61, she formed GLAD and GLAD Hamp, which focused primarily on Lionel Hampton and his band members. But circling back to Oklahoma to end this presentation, here's a clip of Roy Milton on one of the earliest Hamptone recordings, playing Burma Road Blues from 1946. This is courtesy of the Internet Archive. Thank you, George. Thank you also, Conrad Strauss, for editing my clips. So Burma Road Blues. I should mention this is Ray Milton's sextet with Milton on vocals, Buddy Floyd and Jimmy Nottingham on trumpet, Hosea Sapp on sax, Camille Howard on piano, Dave Robinson on bass, and it was composed by Lionel Hampton. That wake everyone back up? So in conclusion, black entrepreneurs created their own labels, their own networks, and sometimes their own pressing plants and radio stations in order to combat combat discriminatory practices that shut them out of the market. By doing so, they were able to maintain creative control, releasing music for consumption within Black communities that was often marginalized by mainstream labels and mainstream radio. And most importantly, they played a very pivotal role in giving Black artists wider exposure and recognition. And so that's it. I'm currently considering various ways to move forward with this project. My goal is to make the database more widely available and maybe partner with somebody who's interested in furthering this research. I have the database on my laptop. I haven't mounted a version on the web yet, but I can do so. So anyone who's interested in looking at it more fully can see me after this presentation, or I should say after the next presentation, because I'm chairing that one. So thank you very much.
And we still have time for some questions. Yes, can we get a, like, to David?
In your photos that you showed at the beginning in the upper left-hand corner, you had a picture of Burgess Gardner from Chicago. I was in a band that played with him. He was a fantastic trumpet player. It was Al Fook's orchestra. Al Fook was a trombone player who played with McShann, Jay McShann, in 1941. But Burgess Gardner, I have a couple 45s that have his name on it. Maybe you already have them, but he was a producer, so maybe I could send them to you. I could record them and take pictures of the labels.
Yeah, that would be great. Is this on? Thank you very much.
We'll go George and then earlier in your presentation, you mentioned some of the interesting people that you're meeting in Discogs with these interesting names. I'm wondering what your handle is for.
I don't remember.
First question to Tim. You said that Broom was the first to record classical music by Black artists. That may be true for flat disc records, but didn't Macy Hyers record classical areas much, much earlier on cylinders?
By Black artists, as you know, there are relatively few cylinders. All that exist, you've covered in Europe, and I've covered for America, I guess. And white artists, of course, would do classical music. Even George Gaskin and people like that would do that. But in terms of Black artists recording classical or what we would call concert music, no, the George Johnsons and the Burt Williams and those people never ventured into that field.
Yeah, Macy Hyers was in the catalogs, but we don't know whether she actually recorded, because at that time, when people put in orders for a record, then the artist would be called in to make that one record. So even though she was on the catalog of the phonograph company, it does not necessarily mean that she actually recorded. At least the cylinders have never been found to date.
Yeah, if you're talking about the 1890s and the very early 1900s, when practically every phonograph, every cylinder phonograph would also be a recording machine. And we know there were stores that would record that way, famously the Maple Leaf Rag and Wilbur Sweatman, maybe. Those were made locally, and they may have been played on local machines, and there could very definitely be Black artists who did that. I've found references in newspapers and such to some of that, some of which I outlined in Lost Sounds. None of them that I've found so far seem to be concert music. That doesn't mean they don't exist or didn't exist, but they all seem to be black quartets in some cases, or black vaudeville performers or minstrel performers, something like that.
And Brenda, you asked me yesterday how many black companies do I think existed, and I said about 10. And I'm very glad you proved me wrong. And with hindsight now, I think I can add 1 or 2 from my own collection.
Other questions?
First comment, Brenda, it's great to see you on the other side of the microphone. After all those years of production you did for this conference, thank you for presenting. Yeah, I think that deserves. But my question is for Tim, and maybe I missed this, but Broom, he seemed to change in the early 20s to this second career, and why?
Well, first of all, Broom Special Phonograph Companies probably lost him a significant amount of money. That wasn't working out. He started several other kind of small businesses when he first moved to the Boston area in 1904, various kinds of chemicals and so forth. Seemed to be a very innovative kind of guy. Printing, you remember he published one of the early recordings by Cook in as early as the 1890s, and he considers Medford to be his headquarters at that time. So he was used to the printing business and used to getting things printed. And he obviously saw a need for a printing company there, job printing kind of company. And he ran it well enough, he and his son, to in fact make it a really thriving business in the 1920s and 1930s. So he had largely moved out, as far as we can tell, of the cultural promotion field, shall we say, of the by that time. He needed to find a new business. He had experience in many areas. He's a real networker and real good salesman, I would guess, by what he did. So that seemed a good fit for him. So he started a printing company, and that carried him the rest of his life.
So he could make more money there.
Yeah.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
I'm just going to make a real quick announcement. So some people were loading in with another production company, and actually was the grandson of David Teagarden, who was the drummer for Bob Seger and owns Teagarden Studios here in town. And they were real excited about what we're doing. They said, tonight, if you're not going to the Johnny Cash thing at the VFW at 1109 East 6th, is a free music event with some of the best musicians in Tulsa, they said, happening just right down the road. So if you're interested in live music, come see. I'll have this information up there. So if you're not going to the Johnny Cash thing, it's free at the VFW. Some of the best musicians in town, they said, 1109 East 6th Street. And she owns Horton Records here in town, and they were really excited about ours. They just happened upon us. So free music if you're not going to the Johnny Cash thing. Other questions?
Hello. I really liked the map that you made and of the states, and it also occurred to me that your presentation was really focused on the U.S., and I'm curious, I guess, your approach to this history from an American standpoint versus an international standpoint. And, you know, there's labels in Canada and Mexico, all over the world as well. What are your plans to kind of think about this in terms of like an
Absolutely none.
Yeah. No.
But
I know you know
I think
this,
you need to
but
talk to this man sitting right in front here.
I sense there is a very American story that is being told in your database and the way you're organizing things. And I'm just curious
Well,
about that.
I like to think so. I mean, you know, I don't take personal credit for a lot of this research because a lot of people have been researching, you know, particular labels or artists on their own. But so my role has been mostly as a compiler of this information, and so I don't want to take too much credit on my own, but I think it is a very fascinating story. I also wish that as I went along, I would have been keeping track of the A&R folks, because there were so many African-American A&R reps for other countries that really, other labels that are really part of this story of the emergence of the black music industry. And okay, good.
We have time for one more question.
Brenda, I was wondering in your research if you've contacted Arts member Jay Bruder. He put out a 17 CD set of R&B and DC, and I'm always buying R&B records from him that are obscure.
Yes, I did. I did have a lot of communication with Jay. Jay actually had also offered me an interview that was done with Roy Milton, but the sound was not really great, and I just didn't have time to include it. But regardless of all the research that Jay has done, when I asked him for a list of black-owned labels, he said, well, I can only think of a couple in my region, and I have a pretty good list now. I haven't shared it back with Jay because I've just been, this presentation has taken so many hours of my time that I haven't reached back out to people. There are also lots of people that I'd like to interview at some point in the future. I mean, almost none of, I shouldn't say that. Of course, none of the early people in my database are still alive, but since my database does go up to 1970, there are others that I hope to reach out to.
I just wondered because that album he put out,
right,
it covers your period. And
exactly. Yeah. But again, I'm only focusing on the black-owned labels just as a gauge of participation in the industry.